Welcome to Mission Majjhima.
Ajahn.
So tell us about the Mahādhammasamādāna Sutta.
So the greater discourse on the various ways of undertaking things begins with several monastics, monks, asking the Buddha, or the Buddha asking monastics rhetorically, why it is that despite wishing may good, agreeable things increase for me and may disagreeable things decrease, nonetheless, for beings, good, agreeable things do not increase and disagreeable things do increase. So why is it that despite wishing for happiness, we so often fail to find it? And the Buddha then goes on to speak about how a unwise, ignorant person, not skilled in the discipline of the noble ones or trained, with no regard for those noble ones, does not understand the way of undertaking things, which is painful now, resulting in future pain, pleasant now, resulting in future pain, and not understanding that, therefore, it cultivates those ways that either pleasant or painful result in future pain, and how such a fool does not understand the way of practice that is painful now but ripens in future pleasure, and pleasant now and ripens in future pleasure, and therefore does not undertake either of those paths, and therefore the good, agreeable, wished-for things do not increase. And the word for fool in this case, or what is translated in some translations as fool, is just avidasu, which means one who doesn't see, which is just a very compassionate translation, I'd say, or word, and really points to how our folly and lack of ability to find happiness is deep down just due to ignorance, which I find a very powerful message, actually. The Buddha then goes on to outline the way of practice that is painful and results in future pain. And it is the way of practice where one, though not taking pleasure in engaging in the 10 courses of unwholesome action, so the akusala kamapata, which is killing, stealing, engaging in sexual misconduct, and then the 4 kinds of wrong speech: harsh speech, idle chatter, lying, and divisive speech. Giving the mind to cruelty or to strong ill will, hatred, and strong covetousness, and holding wrong view. All those things, one, despite not liking them, nonetheless engages in them and therefore cultivates the causes of future suffering. And then there's the case that is pleasant now, resulting in future pain, which is one who actually delights in all those things and leads oneself into future pain and painful result. Then the way of practice, which is painful now but ripens in future pleasure, is one who, despite having a great deal of difficulty refraining from those unwholesome roots of kama, of action, nonetheless refrains from them and engages in their wholesome opposites, not killing, not stealing, etc., holding right view, and therefore cultivates or if a fool does not cultivate that path that ripens in future pleasure, and if wise does cultivate that path that ripens in future pleasure, and same with the path that is pleasant now, resulting in future pleasure. A wise person cultivates it, the unwise person does not. So the Buddha then finally finishes with this really powerful set of similes where he says that the root of practice which is painful now, ripening in future pain, is like a bad taste in potion, which is also poison. The root of practice which is pleasant now, ripening in future pain, is a nice tasting drink, but which is poisoned. And the path of practice which is pleasant now, or painful now, ripening in future pleasure, is medicine, basically, bad tasting medicine. I think it's fermented urine, which is a classic in the suttas. And despite it tasting bad, the wise person would drink it for healing. And the path of practice that is pleasant now, ripening in future pleasure, is like a tonic of ghee and honey and all these wholesome medicines of the Buddha's time that leads to healing. And the Buddha says, just as the dawn would illuminate the sky in the last month of the autumn season, the path that is pleasant now and ripening in future pleasure dispels or is the foremost among all the paths. Ajahn, what would you draw out of this discourse?
Something which this sutta highlights for me is something which is called in other suttas or framed as the cause for wisdom, the cause which leads to wisdom in the future. And that is specifically going to wise people and asking what, when I do it, will lead to my long-term welfare and happiness. And here there are a number of keys to that, is that, the path can be one of happiness, of sukha. But a key distinction here is this long-term or long-lasting welfare and happiness. And that's important. Like, we have to look not just what's pleasant now, but what will actually be enduringly pleasant into the future. And there are some perhaps counterintuitive insights that the Buddha points to. And specifically, he highlights in this sutta how it's not necessarily the case that each of us will experience performing ethical conduct and refraining from unethical, immoral conduct as universally pleasant. It's that, if we've had bad habits, when we take on, we say, see the detriment in killing. If we've been hunting all our lives and someone tells us and enjoying that based on the camaraderie or whatever it is that we enjoyed about hunting, or sexual misconduct, stealing, lying, all these things, there is a measure of gratification that might come with those immoral actions in the present moment. And when we focused on them, different people at different times can experience pleasure in that which is ultimately unhelpful, unbeneficial. So I really appreciate the Buddha's insight there that, we might struggle as we take on what are good habits, but which immediately don't feel good because we've been of bad habits. So that's helpful, that it's not going to be all, peaches and cream from day one when we take on these things which have not been what we've been used to. Ajahn, what else would you like to draw out from this sutta?
I think you pointing to how it's not necessarily the case that each of us will delight in ethical action right from the get-go is important. And to note in the Buddhist path just the ability to change that perception, to really rejoice. And the Buddha talks about silanusati, like recollection of one's virtue, and how you can change your perception of it so that you do delight in those acts where you really recollect the happiness they lead to, and see that over time such that the valence changes in the moment. Basically you're changing that tonic of medicine. A spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. You're changing the taste and your perception of it. Another thing I think interesting here is just the fact that even though one does not enjoy breaking the precepts, engaging in these unwholesome actions, it still is karma. And there's a key distinction in Buddhism between motivation and intention. If your intention is to kill, to take a life, even if the motivation is a sense of duty, a sense of, you could do something with a great deal of remorse. And even though, the Abhidhamma says joy is a karmic intensifier, so perhaps the karma is mitigated to some extent, it's still karma. And I just find that meaningful because we can be drawn into situations that are very hard to avoid breaking precepts, even if we don't want to be. And to note that from a Buddhist perspective, it's still karma, which is why the precepts of not killing and not lying are, regardless of motivation, these very firm boundaries or barriers for us as Buddhists, as practitioners. And then I just love that simile at the end of the dawn, dispelling all paths, because this path is supposed to be one of pleasure and it's supposed to be joyful. And if we can change our perception of that medicine to one of ghee and honey, then what a good thing.
So Ajahn, tell us, what is the word of the week?
The word of the week is vidavant, which means, and though I'm pronouncing it wrong almost certainly, it means one who sees. And another word for wise person, it comes from the root vid, which means to see. And it's just a very compassionate way of looking at the parts of us and those people around us who, either engage in wholesome action or don't. It's just from a lack of knowing or knowing. And I find that a good way to look at things. So,
all right. Well, join us. Hopefully you'll all be able to see the path and practice wisdom over the next week. And we'll see you, if this is the first time, over on Zoom. And hopefully all of you can join us next week for Majjhima Nikaya number 47. Ajahn.
Ajahn.